So we're still working with the Easter project of turning death into life. It's God's job, and we're called to help, which is the point of emphasis for this week. On Easter night, Jesus gave the Holy Spirit to his inner circle of disciples and transferred responsibility for his work to them. As the Father has sent me, so I send you, he told them. And just like that, the disciples, the ones who had been learning, graduated to become apostles, the ones being sent out in the world to continue God's work of turning death into life. Last week, we looked at that resurrection process as concentric circles, with the center circle being the ability to embrace death. And the next one out, the one we talked about last week, the ability to embody service by adopting the mind of Christ. This week, we add the outermost ring of the circle, which is the need to multiply the effort, which ensures that all the sacrifices we've made in those first two things have a chance to make a difference that will last. To multiply the effort turns a gift into a legacy, and a single act of kindness or liberation into a movement. The main biblical point to note here is that Jesus could only turn over the job to his disciples at the end because he had already recruited them 3 years earlier and had been training and preparing them for this very moment. And while we tend to think of only those 12 that he first recruited as being disciples, there were many, many others that were listening and learning along the way. I picked the passage from Luke that Kim just read specifically to highlight that. She read from Luke 10. At the start of Luke chapter 9, Jesus sends the 12 out on a mission, not just to proclaim that God is drawing near to them, but also to heal the sick, which they do without Jesus with them. They just go out, okay, we're going to heal some sick folks today. At the end of chapter 9, we learn about additional disciple wannabes who don't make the cut because they're only half-hearted and aren't willing to make the sacrifices necessary to do the work. But at the start of chapter 10, we learn that there are still plenty who are willing to do what it takes. Enough that Jesus is able to handpick 72 of them, that's 72 in addition to the original 12, and puts them to work. Like the job of the 12 at the start of chapter 9, the job of the 72 is twofold. First, they're to scout out a town to find people and places that will host Jesus and his entourage when they arrive. It's, if you've done pre-planning for a conference or whatever, it's event planning. going to the venues ahead of time, figuring out who can I stay with, who's going to be friendly, who's not. So that's part of the job. But second, they're also to cure any sick people they happen to find in those places. Event planning usually doesn't do that. The job they're given is not really much different than the job given to the 12 at the start of chapter 9. It's preparation for Jesus' arrival on the one hand, and practice for carrying forth his work once he's gone on the other. That kind of multiplication of effort is how you move from a single event to a movement. Any individual act of service and sacrifice can help the greater good. And on occasion, those actions intersect with someone who's so affected by them that they become the next Mother Teresa or Martin Luther King Jr. Any bit of kindness and love injected into the world helps, no matter how small it may seem in the moment. And we never know where the ripples from that might lead. But it's also true that Jesus didn't just run around and do good deeds, suffer, die, and rise again, and hope that somebody would notice and do something meaningful with it. From the very start of his ministry, Jesus planned for a movement that would help the biblical vision of peace, joy, and blessing become manifest on the earth. He recruited 12 people to start, and then he kept right on recruiting all along the way. Jesus also vetted them, not by standards of wealth, education, or status, but by their own willingness to embrace death and embody service. The call to every one of his disciples was to stop what they were doing, give it all up, and follow him. And while we understandably focus on the ones who actually did that, there are plenty of stories in the Gospels of those who were not willing to do that. Sometimes he presented those examples in the form of parables, and sometimes we're just told about encounters that he has in his travels. At the end of Luke 9, Jesus is reminding those who were caught up in his celebrity that this is not a fan club. He points out that those who travel with him are actually homeless. You know, the foxes have holes and birds have their nests, but I ain't got no place. You still want to come? He also points out that those who have second thoughts because of what they might be leaving behind aren't yet ready to join him. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all tell the story of a rich young ruler who Jesus meets. Jesus is clearly pleased with the young man's commitment and enthusiasm, so he issues the same call that the first 12 disciples responded to. Leave it all, come and follow me. But the young man can't do it. His money is his stumbling block. He can't get rid of his possessions and wealth, and he leaves Jesus with sadness. And I imagine that Jesus was sad too. But Jesus didn't go running after him and modify the deal to try to get him to stay. Jesus was not interested in his follower count or how many likes his parables got on Facebook. He knew what it would take to get the job, and if you were willing to do that, fine. If you weren't, I'm sorry. Maybe you'll become willing over time, but now's not the right time for you. Jesus told his followers to carefully count the cost before signing up for discipleship. If they couldn't embrace death and fully embody service in the first instance, he knew they wouldn't be able to hold up in the last. As we know, even some of those who did do it at the beginning got tripped up in the end, Judas being the tragic example here. Now, taking all of that to a practical level, what this means for us as a local church body is that we will have a lasting impact only by the luck of the draw, unless we're intentional about multiplying our efforts in the ways and for the reasons that Jesus did, to help God's vision of the beloved community become a reality in this world, to accept the calling to help turn this world of spiraling decay and systemic death into a garden brimming with life, health, and peace for all. The same is true on the smaller level of particular ministries within the church. And then those particular ministries rely on the individuals who lead and maintain them. Those people and ministries in their particulars will change over time as we adapt to the changing landscape and year turns into decade, turns into century. But the need to multiply the effort in order to ensure the impact for the greater good remains, even as the particulars come and go. So I want to turn to one of the questions that we talked about a few weeks ago when we had our discussion tables inside. What are the obstacles to multiplying the effort? What makes it difficult for us to work in teams and to prepare a line of succession? No doubt there are more than just these, but I've identified 3 things that I think hinder us. And I suspect almost all of you have seen one or more of these things at work in various settings and groups that you've been a part of, whether on the job or in leisure activities. The first 2 things are pretty straightforward, even though they may be challenging for an organization to resolve. Thing number 1 is that the person doing the work simply wants to do it by themselves. Sometimes that's driven by various personality quirks. We need to be the hero, or we need to be needed. We refuse to admit that we need help, or we're too devoted to having the job done perfectly to risk having someone else color outside the lines. But sometimes we just really like doing something and don't want to share it or give it up when it's time to pass the torch. An even bigger reason that we often want to do something alone is that it's simply easier or faster, usually both. And boy, howdy, do I understand that one. Many hands do make light work, but many hands require coordination and usually some kind of training or instruction, which take time. And to get those many hands to keep on helping time after time means working to create an atmosphere that lets every single one of them actually enjoy the experience, avoid burnout, and come away feeling like they've made a meaningful contribution to a larger goal. It's often much, much easier to just do a thing ourselves. But in the long run, it stifles growth of both the ministry and the church and deprives people of fellowship and opportunities to experience the joys of service. So that's the first obstacle to multiplying the effort. We'd rather do it ourselves for any number of reasons. The second one is also easy to grasp, but not necessarily to solve. And that is that the job we need doing requires unavailable resources, either human or financial. In some cases, the under-resourced ministry is in the category of nice but not necessary, and so we can put it off until the resources come. But it is a real problem if what we need is mission critical and either absent or in short supply. Excuse me. The third obstacle to multiplying our efforts is the most complex and multifaceted. Even when additional help is wanted and encouraged, and the financial and human resources are present, those who could do it are unwilling. The reasons for that are legion, and it's more complex because those reasons often exist in combination. So I'll tick off just a few, and I'm sure you could name a dozen more. One, people are busy with things that have a higher priority in their lives. Two, a bad experience with the church or a particular leader has left them a bad taste in their mouth and they're unwilling to re-engage. Three, the planning for the work is poor, non-existent, or not well communicated, leaving people uninspired to join in. The work is expecting too much of too few and needs to be broken down into smaller chunks. Or lastly, the ministry isn't viewed as meaningful or relevant to the larger mission of the church. We humans have not fundamentally changed since Jesus' day. All the reasons people gave for not accepting Jesus' invitation to join in his mission then are essentially the same reasons that people give now. There are things related to our status and comfort that we can't bring ourselves to give up. We can't embrace those little deaths that are required in that. We have conflicting priorities, making us able to serve as a leisure activity when other things are taken care of, but not to completely embody service with the mind of Christ. And those things compound to make multiplying the effort too difficult, unpleasant, or counterproductive. The interplay of the three things we've been looking at across these weeks is needed if we're to be of service to God in turning death into life, embracing death, embodying service with the mind of Christ, and multiplying the effort. They all have to work together. Just one or even two together can't do it in any kind of sustained manner. But there is good news. It's possible to spot the problem before it's too late. We've looked at these things as concentric circles with Embrace Death at the center, Embody Service as the next ring out, and then the outer ring being multiplying the effort. The place where difficulties in any of the circles will first become evident is in that outer layer. The root problems may be much further in, but the decay becomes visible when the teamwork is struggling or non-existent. When there is apathy about the work and no one's willing to step up, when ministries are run by individuals and not teams, those are warning signs that encourage us to say, why is that? And to look and examine the circles further in. And the root problems may be much further in, but we see it first on the edges. Now, too many churches see dwindling engagement and point fingers outward. For decades now, as long as I've been in ministry, and before that actually, we have preferred to blame low church engagement on Sunday morning sports programs. I think that is a deflection from asking ourselves the hard question of why the church has been unable to communicate the basic need for spiritual connection and transcendence, or why the church has not been able to adapt to a changing culture. Why are we insisting that you can't be Christian if you don't show up in person for one particular hour on one particular day each week? If we really believe that faith and spirituality are critical to human thriving, why have we built such heavy walls around where, when, and how people are allowed to engage such things? I've heard people criticize church rituals and say too much ritual is somehow the problem. It's too esoteric and people don't connect to it. We say that with a straight face. When people at football games are painting their entire bodies the color of their teams, coordinating body waves across stadiums filled with tens of thousands of people, and fracturing society over the correct posture for the national anthem. We will give hours of our time to that. We'll make a day of it, and even in extreme heat and cold, while paying big money for the privilege. And is there any larger and more elaborate series of rituals than the Olympics? If sport has displaced church in the United States, it is not a scheduling issue or objection to arcane rituals. I mean, there was a self-avowed shaman in furs and horns storming our Capitol on January 6th. People are finding destructive and violent ways to meet their need to belong to a community and to be part of something larger than themselves. And too often we sulk in our pews instead of presenting a life-giving alternative. Every single person I know, religious or not, will move heaven or earth to make time for something they believe their children absolutely need. Spirituality is a basic human need. It's been proven and published in peer-reviewed journals for more than 20 years now. That people don't believe that need can be met in a church is not the fault of the culture. People have gone to churches and left feeling no different than when they came in. I'm currently rereading the book Leadership on the Line by Ronald Heifetz and Martin Linsky. And they write, when you belong to the organization or community that you are trying to lead, you are part of the problem. If you have been in a senior role for a while and there's a problem, it is almost certain that you had some part in creating it and are part of the reason it has not yet been addressed. Ouch. But also, yeah. I turned 63 last week, and I have been in various church leadership roles since middle school. I've been a member of the clergy for 28 years. So yeah, I've had a part in creating the problem. And if you've been a church member for any number of years, Guess what? So have you. If you've held leadership roles, you get a double portion. Now, we don't need to beat ourselves up over that. That's water under the bridge, and it doesn't help a single soul. But we do need to quit blaming others and embrace the death of what we believed was our own innocence and righteousness in this problem. It's time to embody service with the mind of Christ and start rowing together as a team to bring this beloved community and the larger world of God's beloved children to full, abundant, and everlasting life. To be continued. Amen.